Good evening, everybody. My name is Lena Ettinger. I'm Director of Open Circle Jewish Learning for Classic Classes, and I am here with my colleague Cindy Bernstein, who is the Admin Coordinator for Open Circle Jewish Learning, and also Ahava Rosenthal is on the telephone. She is my colleague and Director of Special Programs for Open Circle Jewish Learning. And also we have Kim Bodemer here, who is the new Director of Adult Learning. And I would like to give Kim the opportunity to give you some words of welcome.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here for Lag BaOmer and to be with all of you and to be able to study together. And I'm looking forward to many, many more opportunities in the coming days and weeks and months and years for us to get to know one another.
Thank you, Kim. So, yeah, I wanted to I'm really grateful for all of the faculty that we have, and especially Rabbi Margalit, who is one of my teachers. And I would like to read his bio in case people don't know who he is. So Rabbi Margalit is a rabbi and scholar with 30 years of experience in teaching, writing, organizing, and congregational leadership. Raised in Honolulu. As a young adult, he spent 12 years in Israel, where he received rabbinic ordination, and he returned to the US and earned his PhD in Near Eastern Studies at UC Berkeley with focus areas in Talmud, literary theory, and anthropology. He's taught at Bard College, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, Hebrew College Rabbinical School, and now is chair of the Rabbinic Text Department at the Aleph Ordination Program. He is also director of the Earth-Based Judaism track of the Aleph Ordination Program and is founder of the nonprofit Organic Torah. And he lives in Newton, Massachusetts with his wife and 2 sons. And he recently published a book, The Pearl and the Flame, A Journey into Jewish Wisdom and Ecological Thinking. And tonight, we're going to receive some lessons on disagreements with all due respect, lessons found in nature and the Talmud. Bavakasha.
Thank you, Lena. And it's great to thank you, Cindy, for all your help. And Kim, it's great to meet you. And it's great to see all of you. Some of you I know and some of you I don't know. And some of you I can't see because you're not. You feel free to turn on your videos because we all love to see each other. Ellen, good to see you. And Sharon, I know you're there. And Harvey, it's great to see you. Well, okay. Happy Lag BaOmer, everyone. We've still got a little daylight in Lag BaOmer time. So it's a wonderful time during the counting of the Omer. And yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about this, but the counting of the Omer is a time when we talk about, the story about Rabbi Akiva's, students, and this idea of not respecting one another, and that's one of the things. This whole idea of how we get along in our society, and not simply how we get along in society, but how we actually can get along even if we really strongly disagree. And that is something that I think that it's I don't know if it's on everybody's mind, but it's certainly on my mind a lot when I just read the paper or listen to the news, just how divided people are, how divided we all are, and what can you do about it other than saying, well, those folks are all wrong, and I wish, and like, why don't, whatever, why don't they secede from the union or something? That's very understandable. And but we understand also that we need to be living in a society where we have people who disagree. And that's really what I'm talking about. And I want to talk about it from a kind of interesting, I think it's interesting point of view, which is that I think the answers to that, or at least some of the answers that I found, can be found in our sources, in Talmudic sources especially. But they're not only there, it's also in nature. And that's one of the things, if you look at, what Lena wrote about my bio, I do a lot of things with Torah and nature. I have a nonprofit called Organic Torah. And when I say organic Torah, what I mean is not that we can find some nice ecological ideas in the Torah, or we can find a verse here, or we can find a midrash there that says something that is sort of like along the lines of our ecological thinking. That's all well and good. But what I really am trying to understand, and what I really see going on when I look at these texts, is that I see that there is a parallel between I would say, like the Torah of nature and the nature of Torah. That is to say, the way the Torah is actually organized and some of the principles that we find. And when I say Torah, I don't just mean like the Bible, biblical, the 5 books of Moses. I mean all of traditional Jewish wisdom. The Torah, Talmud, Midrash, all of these texts are all Torah in the larger sense. And when I see how that is organized, it's organized actually along the same lines as the living world, as the world of nature, which kind of makes sense when you think about that. We call it a Eitz Chaim, we call it a tree of life, because it really is a tree of life. And it's quite amazing, because these are principles that I've found, which I write about in my book, that really show us how the Torah is actually really kind of alive and flexible and dynamic, and has to do with relationships in the same way that an ecosystem is. And so I want to look tonight at one of those principles. And one of the principles that I want to look at is called what I call nestedness. And we're going to get from there to the question of like how we can argue and still be in relationship, how we can argue and still respect one another. So we're going to get there, don't worry, but we've got to sort of start from the beginning and talk a little bit about like some of these natural principles, these organic principles that underlie the Torah. So I hate to do this because I love to see everybody's beautiful faces, but I'm going to share screen, so I'll only be able to see some of your faces at one time. I don't mind at all. In fact, I welcome questions and thoughts. Even you don't have to wait, by any means, don't have to wait for the end. So if you have a question or a thought, you can like raise your hand electronically, because it's probably easier to see. If you know how to do that, you go down to where it says reactions and a little thing called raise hand. If not, you can just shout something out, because I might not see you, or you can put something in the chat and Cindy will let us know about it. So those are 3 ways if you've got it. I very much welcome, because you really don't want to just listen to me for an hour. And I want to hear what you're thinking, and I want to hear where this is landing and what you have to say about it. So with that little intro, I'm gonna share screen, and we got our first little text that we're gonna look at. Oh, actually, before I share screen, before I stop seeing you, is there any question or any thoughts on any of that intro that I just gave you? Before I dive in, I welcome any thoughts. If what I said made no sense to you, Matthew, thank you.
I'm reminded of a comment from anthropologist Gregory Bateson, who said that the majority of problems in the world stem from the difference between the way nature works and how people think. And so it's nice to be talking about ways in which a spiritual tradition might in fact be aligned with the way nature works, and so part of the solution instead of the problem.
Yeah, yeah, music to my ears. Gregory Bateson is one of my heroes, one of my early influences, and I love Bateson's work. And he talks about exactly what you're saying. Everything is connected by the pattern which connects, and because of this, he never actually really found a home in academia, because as you said, like, we've tended in the West anyway, in the sort of modern West in the last 300 years or so, to think in a kind of way that divides everything up and puts things in silos. And he said, and what he was really saying, just to expand on what you were saying, Matthew, that there are connections between the way nature works and the way people works and society and economies, and and he made contributions to anthropology, to psychology, to family therapy theory, to a lot of different things, because he wasn't bound by any one discipline. He looked at the way life works, and so it's very much along the lines of what I'm doing. He talked about cybernetics, which was the language in his time. I'm really connecting this to systems thinking, systems theory. So if that's familiar, I don't want to get all technical, but if that's familiar, then I just wanted to mention those things. Thank you for bringing up Bateson. Okay. Okay, so we want to start with this. You see this? Nestedness Mikdash. So in my book, I actually make three parallels, which I call the three mems. And they're minyan, mikdash, and mitzvah. We're not going to go into the other ones, but tonight we're talking about mikdash, which is Hebrew for sanctuary. And we're looking at the natural principle, the ecological principle of nestedness. Sometimes people talk about this as levels of organization in biology. And I start out with a quote from one of my favorite ecologists, Tom Wessels, wrote a wonderful book called The Myth of Progress, among other things. Complex systems also tend to be nested, one within another, and are separated by fuzzy boundaries. There are boundaries that allow for the flow of energy, materials, and information between larger and smaller scale systems, but maintain each system's integrity. Biological, and political systems demonstrate these attributes well. So that's what he's saying. It's like we have these systems. And so I've got this illustration here. Anybody know what this illustration is? A little fuzzy, I'm sorry, I kind of didn't get a great picture. Anybody have a sense? You can sort of kind of see what it is. Anybody know what it is? You can shout it out or raise your hand.
Mishkan?
Yeah, it's not only the Mishkan, this is actually the temple. This is actually a diagram of what they think the second temple looked like, as it's described by the rabbis mostly. And you can see, if you look at my cursor, you've got all these outer walls, but you have, like, right here where my cursor is, that's the Holy of Holies. And then you have this little thin line, and that's like the curtains between, you had the ark. At one point you had the ark in the Holy of Holies, and then out here you have the showbread table and the menorah and the incense altar. That's all within this. And then you've got this other door here, and you have the space between this area and the Mizbeach, the altar where they did the sacrifices. And you had the laver here where they washed their hands. So this area between there, all of this is in this court, which was the priestly court here. You have an outer court. This was like the outer court, the women's court. You have got the walls of the temple. Then this is on the Temple Mount, and that was within the walls of Jerusalem. And what this reminds me of is very much the way that you have in a cell, like in a body, you have within a cell, you have the organelles, you have the mitochondria, then you have the cell, then you have the cell within the organ within the body, and the body within the community, and so forth and so on. I have just below here these 10 levels of organization in biology: molecule, cell, tissue, organ systems, organism, population, community, ecosystem, biosphere. And then 10 levels of holiness. This is actually from the Mishnah. I didn't make this up. The Holy of Holies, the Holy Palace, between the palace and the altar, priest court, Israelite male court, Israelite women's court, walls of the temple, Temple Mount, walls of Jerusalem, walled cities in Israel. So, and the thing about these things, this is nested. And it really is a very parallel structure, because the way that it works is that we're not saying that it's an either or. You're not saying that, well, you're holy if you're in the Holy of Holies, and here you're completely out, there's nothing there. No, there's some holiness here, and you've got different parameters. And then there's a little bit less, but their holiness kind of like goes between. So there are boundaries, but as Tom Wessel said, they're fuzzy boundaries. They allow the integrity of that one place, but they also allow for energy, information, nutrient to go in between. And that is really important. The fact that you have both, and you have both a boundary and also communication. Maybe you can see where this direction might be going. That's our first slide. And let me just stop share here. And let me just ask if there's any questions anybody didn't understand or thought, or if that brought up any ideas or thoughts for any folks here. We're just getting started here. I also like to see who's here now. I can see the people at least in at least the little box there. Okay, if we don't have any questions or thoughts, let me go on to the second slide. Okay, this is an English translation of what we call the Fourfold Song by Rav Kook. Rav Abraham Isaac Kook was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, pre-state Palestine, and was an amazing person, raising rabbi. He was both like a mystic and a poet and a legal halachist and a political leader. He has really incredible. But this is one of his poems, one of his songs that he wrote, and it's translated here by Danny Matt, and I'll just read this. There is one who sings the song of his soul, discovering in his soul everything, utter spiritual fulfillment. There is one who sings the song of his people, emerging from the private circle of his soul, not expansive enough, not yet tranquil. He strives for fierce heights, clinging to the entire community of Israel in tender love. Together with her, he sings her song, feels her anguish, delights in her hopes. He conceives profound insights into her past and her future, deftly probing the inwardness of her spirit and the wisdom of love, with the wisdom of love. There is one whose soul expands until it extends beyond the border of Israel, singing the song of humanity, in the glory of the entire human race. In the glory of the human form, his spirit spreads, aspiring to the goal of humankind, envisioning its consummation. From this spring of life, he draws all his deepest reflections, his searching, striving, and vision. Then there is one who expands even further until he unites with all of existence, with all creatures, with all worlds, singing a song with all of them. There is one who ascends with all these songs in unison, the song of the soul, the song of the nation, the song of humanity, the song of the cosmos, resounding together, blending in harmony, circulating the sap of life the sound of holy joy. This is from Abraham Isaac Cook, Orot HaKodesh. So let's stop and think about this fourfold song, and any reactions to the fourfold song of Rav Kook. What does this say about Judaism, or about how one might see the world? Yeah, Susan.
Wait, Susan, you're muted.
You're muted, so you can unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, sorry. To me, one thing that I hear is that you can have your own identity and belong to one place, but also be part of a much larger place and merge with other communities and other identities, and you can have both. You can be part of both, and you don't have to only remain in one realm, is what I hear.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not exactly, and that's a big thing. It's not an either or. And one of the things that we see in our world today is very often kind of an either or. That either one feels like, okay, either I'm a universalist or you're a tribalist. Either you're, and within the Jewish world, sometimes we hear these, like, either you're, we should be for the Jews, and or you're just a universalist, and you're and who are you to be, like, separating yourself out from other people? We should all be one human race. And this is saying, no, you don't. As you said, you don't have to choose. You can be connected to your particular people and be connected to humanity. And you can also be an individual and be connected to community. Yeah, Ellen.
I find it beautiful, and my image of it is a strand, an interwoven strand of different parts, and that it's not just that it's one can be individual or have this point of view and accept another. It's that it's very desirable to have all these different points of view coming together, blending in.
Yes, exactly. And that's what he says, in the very end. I'm not exactly sure why Danny Matt translated all of them in unison, because I don't picture it as a unison. I picture it as a harmony. Because that's exactly what goes on. It's a harmony because they're not the same, and yet they can exist in harmony. They can exist with different resonance, but still resonance that can actually work with one another. Yeah, so I think that is very important. Okay. Matthew, yeah. Is that a hand up, or let's see?
Oops, yeah, I was muted for a second.
Okay.
Curious to think of it as a loop. In math, there's an idea of a strange loop where you go up layers of hierarchy, and then you find out you were at the place where you started, like an Escher drawing. And so you start with this first image was the whole universe. You're in your soul, the whole universe in your soul, and then you go up to the community, and go up, and then all of a sudden, eventually, you get to the whole universe, which was kind of where you started. And one of the nice things about that is it doesn't really privilege any one of these things. They're all important, and it's like you can't just ignore one link in the chain. You have to take care of all of them.
Right, beautiful. Yeah, and one thing that I always thought about this the way that Rav Kook wrote it, because it's a little bit, you can see he may be coming from a place which is maybe different than some of the folks today in sort of like contemporary culture, especially younger culture, where he assumes that one would start first with the individual and then to their people and then to like all humanity, and then where I think many people might start maybe with their individual and then go straight to like all of nature, and only last come back to your individual people. It's like especially younger folks today may find it strange to say, okay, well, the natural thing would be to connect to one's ethnic group or particular people. That is actually not so emphasized in our contemporary, certainly American culture right now. So it's interesting that Rav Kook starts there and assumes that that's the primary place to start. He doesn't have to start one or the other. You might start as you said, you might start on the outside and come back in. So yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Harvey, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say something along the same lines as Matthew, starting with the soul. The soul in the beginning encompasses everything, but then it seems like, at least the way Matt translates it, it's a progression from the soul outward. But if the soul encompasses everything, it's not really a progression. It's sort of some sort of loop.
Right. No, it's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Although, that's interesting, kind of like sort of mathematically, it's kind of interesting to think about that and spiritually to think about that, because you're right. It does come down like the whole universe is there. And yet we, as a sort of sociologically, or it's like we do find that those are boundary points, that there is like, yes, we do things as an individual, and I feel myself in my body as an individual, and yet I understand that like I am actually not complete as an individual. I actually do need the people around me. I do need my neighbors, my family, the people. That's actually part of who I am. And so it's a question, it really becomes a question of who am I? And in our society, we very much privilege, I think, a very simplistic kind of idea, like I am an individual, and we are a hyper individualist society, which and not all societies are that way. As most societies throughout world history have more privileged the community, and we tend to privilege the individual. There's a lot to be said, but it's not an either or. One doesn't have to give up being an individual. In fact, one's individuality is enhanced by a balanced, good relationship to these other levels. So let's go on a little bit. Okay, so looking at this idea that we've been talking about, this idea of both and, from either or to both and. And this is a quote from my book, The Pearl and the Flame. You don't need to decide between having boundaries and openness or between tribalism and universalism when we think of the way natural systems always are nested, with one entity fitting into another one whole which is part of another. When we understand that in nature, boundaries are rarely hermetically sealed. Membranes are essential for life, but they are permeable. When we experience the patterns formed by all those parts together, we get intimations of their ultimate unity. And that last line is where I go into one of the, I think, interesting examples from our tradition. I'm sorry, I didn't put in the Hebrew except for the first line, but right sort of hidden in plain sight is, I think, one of the most interesting places where we find this place of nestedness when we say the Shema. And if you look at the Shema, we are actually Shema Yisrael, Shem Elokeinu, Shem Echad. God is one. So there are many ways that one could understand that one. I tend to take a mystical from the Hasidic mystics who say that when we say God is one, we mean that everything is unified, that there is nothing outside of God, that God's spark is found everywhere and in everything, and that's what we mean by the one, that we are part of this unity, which is the cosmos. And so that's how I understand it. But then what do we do with that? How do we assimilate that? How do we bring that into our life in a real way? So they give us instructions. And they say, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. So they start inside our body, in your heart, in your soul, which what might say, inhabits our whole body, with your might, with how you individually go into the world. Put these things that as I command you on your heart, teach them to your children. Speak them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you get up. Bind them for a sign on your hand. Let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So when we think of it, all of these liminal places where we are actually marking the boundaries between one unit or one system and another. We have our body and our sense of touch and feel with our hands, our sense of sight. But then we have our household, where we can say a sign, put it on your doorposts, put it on your gates. Another step, we're not the same when we're in our house as when we are out in public. When you're walking on the road, even further out in public. We even have these like liminal zones between generations. Teach it to your children, one generation to another generation. In the world of time, when you lie down, when you rise up, you're not the same in the day as in the night. So we mark all of these different points of boundaries, and we don't avoid the boundaries, we actually point them out. We say, write them and put these words as you are crossing the boundaries, as if to say, we need these boundaries. These boundaries are part of life. And we are going to say that the oneness extends through all of these boundaries. We're going to try to remember, we're going to try to actually keep that consciousness of oneness, even as we pass through all of those different boundaries. That's part of the way I think that interesting to look at the Shema as a sense of how things can be nested and hint towards their ultimate unity, which is really, I think, what we're saying. Also in the Shema itself, in that first line, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. God is both Eloheinu, our God, and God is also Echad. That is to say, the universal, the one God of all the cosmos. So how can it be both? It's both Eloheinu, our God, and the one God. Where it's right there. It's like a nuclear fusion. We're putting these things together and saying, these things, put them together. They're both our particular God, Eloheinu, and the one God. So that's one place where I see that sense of the nestedness and that sense of boundaries. It's the both and. Okay, let me go on to another slide before we go too much farther. Okay, let's see. Okay, so a little unexpected turn. We're talking about basketball now, but I think it's a great example, and it's not just sort of, it could be anything, it could be a lot of things, but basketball and nature. So this is a quote, not from my book, this is a quote from another book, Making Things Work, by Yanir Bar-Yam, who's actually lives around here in Newton and teaches at MIT as a institute for complex systems thinking, and does a lot of work in consulting in that, and has written a lot of things. So Yanir Bar-Yam writes, for a business, a society, or any other complex system made up of many individuals, improvement will come when the system's structure involves a competition that rewards successful groups. The idea is not a cutthroat competition of teams or individuals, but a competition with rules that incorporate some cooperative activity with a mutual goal. For basketball teams, this mutual goal is maximum exposure and profits for the league and the individual teams. And they collaborate through the NBA to ensure that this mutual goal is always in sight. The rules of the game, particularly the ones that prohibit causing serious injury, ensure that the quality of the competition is always maintained. This kind of non-destructive competition happens in nature too. For example, when wild deer and antelope engage in battles over dominance and mating, it is believed that they are careful to avoid severe damage to each other. These battles have real consequences, but they appear to follow rules that prevent mutual injury. We can learn an important lesson about the proper place of rewards for effective competition. The main reward is simply the right to stay together. This, after all, is what survival of a collective is all about. So that, again, now we're getting to something where he's talking about what is the balance between cooperation and competition. This is, we're getting a little closer now to what we're talking about, our original subject, like argumentation, because that's in some way the way of competition. But this works in evolution and natural selection. It works in any kind of team. It's like if I played basketball, if you're on a basketball team, you're in competition with your teammates. Everybody wants to be the star. Everybody wants to score the most points. But on another level, that if everybody's just all trying to be the star, you're never going to win any games. And so you temper that competition with cooperation so that you win games. And as he was pointing out, even within the league, all the teams, of course, are competing. They all want to be the championship team, but they, in order to make it work, they understand that they're part of a larger whole that actually needs to work together. Let me just give you now a little chart that he does from that same book. This is just a page or so away. So he puts this little chart where, because systems thinkers like things out in these charts. I'm not such a big chart person, but you can just see the different levels. They talk about levels of organization. And this can go for a biological system or a sports system or an economic system, any of those kind of things. Competition, cooperation, competition. On the level of individual, on the level of teams, on the level of the league. It's just basically a chart, a graphic form that when you have levels of organization, and that idea of nestedness, which he's calling levels of organization, that's key, because when we are nested, we are able to both compete and cooperate at the same time. So we're getting to where we really wanted to go, which is, I'll show you the next slide. For heaven's sake, how do we argue with one another and still love one another? Okay, this is from my book. It follows from what I've said about nestedness and the need for some boundaries and coverings, that in our social and political life, the goal shouldn't be for everyone to agree. The goal needs to be that we learn how to live with difference, even deeply consequential arguments, and still get along. We've seen in recent years what it looks like when this delicate balance falls apart. Demonization and a fracturing of the democratic system. Machloket l'shem shamayim. So that's really what we're going to talk about. Machloket l'shem shamayim is Hebrew for an argument for the sake of heaven. This phrase comes from the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot 5:17, where it refers to the arguments between the schools of Hillel and Shammai. It is said that they argued vociferously, but that they still respected one another, would marry into one another's families, and would teach each other's opinions. This is a reflection of the practice of the Talmud of teaching several opinions on an issue, not just the one that is considered correct. It's also at the root of the famous Jewish predilection for arguments, which spawned jokes like 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So what I want to do is juxtapose that idea of a machloket l'shem shamayim with something from nature. This is from Michael Pollan. Sorry, I didn't have the reference here. Michael Pollan wrote in one of his earlier books, he's a wonderful writer about nature and food. Michael Pollan wrote an early book called Second Nature about gardening. It was one of his first. He used to be a gardening columnist. So he wrote this in this book, Second Nature. The gardener feels he has a legitimate quarrel with nature, with her weeds and storms and plagues, her rot and death. What's more, that quarrel has produced much of value, not only in its own time here, oh, pardon me, I forgot to take out my page number, this garden, these fruits, but over the whole course of Western history. Civilization itself, as Freud and Fraser and many others have observed, is the product of that quarrel. But at the same time, the gardener appreciates that it would probably not be in his interest or in nature's to push the argument, to push his side of the argument too hard. Many points of contention that humankind thought it had won, DDT's victory over insects, say, or medicine's conquest of infectious disease, turned out to be Pyrrhic or illusory triumphs. Better to keep the quarrel going, the good gardener reasons, than to reach for outright victory, which is dangerous in the attempt and probably impossible anyway. So that's when I quote that, and then I continue on in the book. Wow, I thought. Michael Pollan is talking about a Machloket l'shem shamayim with nature. He recommends an environmental ethic that he calls the gardener's ethic, in which we humans push our interests. We plant, build, weed, and put up fences, but we don't try to vanquish nature. We understand, like the gardener, that we are in a perpetual argument, and that is okay. It's actually the continued dialogue that is important. The natural principle that underlies both the Talmud's and Michael Pollan's argument for the sake of heaven is the idea of nestedness. The gardener, or the Talmudic rabbi, as the case may be, represents only one level. They are in disagreement on one level, but in unity on a larger or deeper level. Both sides in the argument are not arguing purely for their own interests, but they place their interests into a larger context, heaven or nature. Okay, that's the last slide I will show you. And so what I'm really saying is this idea that we exist not only in one circle. Let's say I'm of this political party. I am a Democrat, I'm a Republican, whatever party one is in. If we say that that's my only circle and that's the only thing I care about, then the other side are going to be demonized. Then there's not going to be, and we don't have to use too much imagination. This is actually happening right before our eyes, where there doesn't seem to be a sense of we are both part of a larger whole, and we need to start to actually understand that, yes, we are in competition, but we both care about, we are both unified in a larger whole, be that we are part of America. Or when we come to something like climate change, yes, we have our national interest. We want our economy to be strong. We want to be the leaders. And we also understand we are all in one planet. If we don't cooperate on climate change, then we are all going to face disaster, which we are. We need to be living on both of those levels, nested in the same way that nature is. That is really what the solution. It sounds simple, but in fact, how to put that into practice, it doesn't seem so easy these days. Let me just take David. I see you have your hand up.
Yes, I wonder how one works predator-prey relationships into this scheme.
Well, predator-prey on some level, there is a balance. It's part of the ecosystem. So in the case of the predator-prey, it may not be the individual it may be that the individual is only limited by their appetite. In the case of, you got like, so you've got a mountain lion or a wolf, but on the level of the population, they're part of a larger system, which hopefully is in balance. So if that system is in balance, then in fact, they are actually mutually beneficial. And, you know, we saw this in some of the famous things when they brought the wolves back to Yellowstone. And so for the individual deer, it might not have been fun, but for the entire ecosystem, it was actually very, very beneficial. They saw the plant life, even the geography of the rivers was improved by the reintroduction of wolves. And so, yeah, so in those cases, it wasn't really something that like the wolf and the deer are going to decide that they're going to, you know, sort of like only have like a light sparring match. But for the population point of view, they are in balance. And so that it does work together. Yeah, that's a great question. Joy.
Hi. So I guess my question is where you were going toward the end of that discussion, where it's really hard to put it into practice, especially if the other side that you're having an argument with is an either or, not a both and, or doesn't see the benefit of not having to be the victor and totally dominate everything.
Yeah, no, definitely. But you know, the thing is, like, that's sometimes true. But then if we fall into that sort of just assumption, then we kind of just perpetuate it. And of course, it's not easy, but when we find out that in fact, there are actually folks who are open to talking. And if we actually approach people in those ways, it often actually helps. You know, I remember reading a while back about somebody who was a congresswoman from rural Maine, in a red district in Maine. And people said, like, you're crazy, don't even try, whatever it is. But this was a woman who was brought up in these neighborhoods and said, no, this is who I am. And I remember they're describing one thing where she's driving around, you know, campaigning, visiting people in their homes and knocking on doors, and comes up to a place where this, you know, is sitting in his big pickup truck. And, you know, and as soon as she drives up, you know, the guy says to her, he says, like, are you gonna raise taxes or something like that? You know, it's like, or are you gonna, I forget exactly what his question was. And she was, yes, I am. She was very honest about what she's doing. And then she said, but she said, it was like, I'm interested. What do you think about it? And she was, and the way she said it, she really was interested in what he had to say. And they started a conversation. And by respecting him and listening to what he said, he didn't agree with actually a lot of things, but he actually ended up voting for her because he could see that that he respected her, she respected him. And in some ways so yeah, there are gonna be people that you can't reach. But there are probably a lot of folks that if we actually approach things with a sense of, I would like to hear what you're saying, I want to approach you with a sense of respect. And if they don't respond, they don't, but they might much more likely to respond. Because there's another thing that Bateson said, in one of Gregory Bateson's ethnographies, one of his famous books called Naven, he introduced a term called schismogenesis, which is when like two parts of a tribe start going in opposite directions, and then it spirals out until the tribe breaks apart and fragments. And that's the thing, is like, if one side is going into it, and then if the other side reacts to it, then both sides become more and more extreme. And we see that happening. So everybody's saying, well, I can't talk to them because they're so extreme. If we both fall into that, then we are really actually it's just gonna get worse. So there are many organizations out there that are actually fostering dialogue. And how can we talk? Just talk with somebody who's opposite opinion. Let's trade some recipes with them. Talk about music, talk about something else. That's one of the things that I'm afraid that we're losing, And one of the things, just like to bring in another topic, because it's when you start to see these all over the place, the fact that everybody is working at home, that so many people, this has been a big thing in the news about like business, and there's all sorts of economic consequences, office spaces, what are the people going to do? The banks are losing money because they're losing rent in the office. But one of the things that people aren't talking about is if everybody's working from home and they're not catching the bus or the train into go to work, and they're not like buying their lunch from the store in the corner, they're not just coming into day-to-day interactions with people that they might actually not agree with people that might be in a different social world than they are, or a different political place. And that is so important. So much of our life now, especially online, is siloed, where we don't have to actually meet anybody we don't agree with. And that's really destructive. And so how can we actually go and make sure that we talk to somebody at the grocery store or talk to somebody at the soccer game and not agree with them, but have a sense of, okay, we're neighbors, and I have a connection to you because we're neighbors. That's something that those kinds of connections within disagreement are something that I feels like we're really in trouble when we weaken that. David, yeah. David, you have your hand up. Is that still of the?
I should have taken it down. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. There you go. That sometimes happens. Okay, Ellen, yeah.
So this was some years ago, pre-pandemic, but a talk on how to get the word out on climate change. And this Jewish group had made contact with a Christian evangelical group, totally different basis of most beliefs, but all they had to do was start talking about the world we want our children to have. And that builds this very strong connection.
Exactly. This whole idea of like, how can we actually connect, given that we have differences, and yet we, we respect each other's differences, but we connect. I always find it really moving now, just when I'm walking my dog in the neighborhood and I wave to the neighbors, because it's actually something we're kind of losing. It's like people move into neighborhoods nowadays and they don't introduce themselves, and they don't, and it's something that, like, another one of my sort of early influences, Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry talked about, this is the first generation that feels like we don't need our neighbors. And that's, that's really a different kind of thing, because it's like when the lights go out, you want to know your neighbors. And it's something worth cultivating, which now I think there's a lot of folks feel like, oh, I don't need to, it's like, I'm connected on the internet, but when the lights go out, that's not going to help you. And there are a lot of times, because it's also just one of those intermediate kind of connections. Like some people I wave to every morning or so, and I don't even know their name, but we have a sense of we are connected. And some of them I do know their name, and some of them we like trade vegetables and garden tools, and and babysit for each other's kids. So having neighbors is another circle. And how do we actually cultivate these different circles that we're part of, as we, it's in that both and kind of a thing. I mean, it's not going to happen, but I feel like, oh, wouldn't it be good if we had, like in Israel, everybody goes to the army, or most people go to the army, or they don't go to the army, they do a national service. What would it be like if we had a national service here, where everybody would actually need to go out for a year to some other part of the country, some other part of the society that they don't normally mingle with? What would that do for our fabric? The sense of feeling like, yes, we are part of something, even with these folks that I don't agree with. So those kinds of levels of connection, I just think that sense of nestedness, like a cell within a body within a soul, body within a community, we are both and I think that that's so important. All right, any one final question or no? If not, okay, Mark, haven't heard from you, Mark or Linda.
Linda, in this case, I'm thinking about our living situation. We live in an apartment condo, and there are how many hundred small apartment
Yeah, it's
condos?
about 120 units.
Okay, and maybe it's 170 or 80 people, and we do not know each other. And there even was the thing about don't go around politicking. I remember, and it's so important. I have been thinking about how do I connect. I don't know who these people are. It makes me afraid. Who knows? Are they stacking weapons? Seriously, it's crazy that we do not know each other. We're living in the same situation and different. And isn't that interesting? Let's find out. And I would like to find a way to do that.
Yeah.
I would have to convince somebody, I think, but
Yeah,
because
well,
not
exactly.
it is not done. You do not knock on a door.
Right.
It-
No, I understand. And that's not, and there's so many situations like, I write about it in our book because like when we moved into our neighborhood, maybe it's New England or whatever it was, but other than our next door neighbors, people didn't come out. And so we just decided with our Jewish chutzpah to like put a little note in everybody's mailbox that we're having like an open house the next Sunday. And we put out, we invited everybody up. We had like some little, apple cider and muffins. And we put up a big board, like saying, it's like, tell me where your dentist is, who your car mechanic is, or, like got all those things. And we got to know like probably like 4 or 5 neighbors really who have been like lifesavers for us, when we needed a babysitter, when we needed somebody to like, come in and like do an extra carpool that we did, all sorts of things that, anyway, we're running out of time. It's all, if you'd like to get the book, you can find it on Amazon. It's called The Pearl and the Flame. And these are the kind of things that I talk about in the book, are these 3 different principles, the way the Torah is actually connected to nature, that the systems approach to the world, approach which says we can actually look at how things fit together, and the relationships are actually more important than the individual things. And that's really a shift in how we need to think, thinking about how things fit together rather than taking them apart. So with that, it's been a pleasure learning with you, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions or thoughts. And I hope I get the chance to learn with you some more.
Thank you so much, Natan. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey, Natan.
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted, Jamie, if you're talking.
This is Jamie Hyams. Thinking
Hi.
of systems within the whole, you went to Reed College.
Yes,
And
I did.
I went to Lewis and Clark, and I ran the Bite, and you were in my house when we were both like 17 and 18 or 19 and 20, whatever it is. And I'm thinking about the totality of how a life, which in a moment seems so small,
Yeah.
but that we both become rabbis 50 years later, or however long ago we went to college, and sort of this wholeness and this unity of not being able to see the forest for the trees, I think is really kind of wild.
Yeah, no,
So I
it's
just
amazing.
wanted to
Yeah.
say hi.
Hi, it's good to see you, Jamie. That's right. Because I do remember that. I remember like doing Israel programs together with you way back.
Exactly. Way
And
back when.
Back in the days. I'm actually going out to Portland in a couple of weeks to do some book talks. So
Well, I live in the Bay Area now, but
okay.
yay, Portland.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll run into each other in our rabbi worlds, because we're all connected.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
Good. All right.
Nice to see you,
Good to
Jamie.
see you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.